should look at the camera here, right?
Okay, today is the 25th of June, 2008. We are at the Buffalo Erie County Historic Society, and we are interviewing Mr. Ted Myers, who is a World War II veteran, and the interviewers are Wayne Clark and Kathleen Vogel-Matthews. Mr. Myers, for the record, would you please state your full name and your date and place of birth?
Okay. My name is Ted Myers. I was born in Buffalo, New York. Let's see, when was I born? October 28th, 1924.
Okay. And did you attend school in Buffalo?
Yes, I went to the Queen of Peace parochial school in Buffalo. It was under a parish that is now being closed. And then I went to Kensington High School, which is a high school in Buffalo. Graduated there in 1942.
Okay.
I was 17 when I graduated.
Now, let me go back a little bit. Do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Oh, yeah, okay. I was in Buffalo and trying to think where I lived at that point, but we had moved around a little bit. And I heard about it in the afternoon after it had been, I had been to the movies. I think I went to the afternoon movies on a Sunday afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came home and I heard about Pearl Harbor being bombed.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I first heard about it. And but I know that at that point, okay, that would have been December. I was still in high school. Okay, I was still in high school, and it was in December. Okay, and then I graduated in June of that 1942.
42.
And I was 17 when I graduated, and my birthday was in October. So the draft age was lowered from 21 to 18, 2 weeks before my 18th birthday. So.
Okay, so did you enlist or were you drafted?
I was drafted. I was drafted. Yeah, I was drafted, and then that summer I worked in a couple places at the National Biscuit Company. I was a flour dumper, an elevator operator, and an unloader of freight cars and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was big enough and strong enough to do some of that stuff. And they hired me when I was 17, although they wanted people that were 18 and older, but they kept me down under the normal 40-hour week. I think I worked about 35 or so hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was glad I worked there for a while. And then I learned how to run a lift truck. It becomes important because of something that happened later on in the service.
Okay.
Because I rode around when you're a 17-year-old kid. It's kind of fun to drive a lift truck and all that stuff.
Uh-huh.
So the National Biscuit Company had 2 subcellars, so that when you went down into the subcellar where to get loads of flour or whatever else, you could see rats running back and forth underneath the subcellars.
Oh.
Okay, that's an aside, but that's what I kind of experienced. And so that was my first job. And then afterwards I left there and I worked for a couple of different places, but the major place was the Bell Aircraft Company, which was in Kenmore, Tonawanda at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I because I learned how to run a lift truck, I was considered experienced in riding a jitney from one department to another at the Bell Aircraft Company thing. I loaded up and I went around all the different departments, and we used to call what used to be called hot jobs. You had to take some certain kinds of parts that were being manufactured to another department.
Okay.
So I'll go off on tangents. I know I will. I know I do that. So.
Okay. So when and where did you enter the service?
Where was I when I entered service? Okay.
Did you enter through Buffalo?
Yes.
Okay.
I was drafted in Genesee Bailey neighborhood where we lived. I think I lived on Peace Street at that time, P-E-A-C-E, which is right behind Queen of Peace Church.
Mhm.
And I went in, and actually a lot of people that were in the outfit that I went into, we were drafted together, went into, let's see, went into Fort Niagara,
Mhm.
which was taking the recruits in Fort Niagara, which is Fort Niagara.
Okay.
And I was there like 2 or 3 days, I think it was. And so were a lot of people that, two or three people that graduated from high school with me. And we were got into the same outfit. And I had one cousin of mine. He was actually a step cousin, because my father had died when I was young, and then my mother married my stepfather. And I inherited 2 stepbrothers and a couple of step cousins, okay?
Mhm.
And one of them was Leonard, who went into the service with me, and he and I went to the same school together, graduated from Queen of Peace, and we had a lot of fun together. He and I were, I suppose we were sort of comedians in grade school,
Okay.
and but I ran into him again in the Philippines.
Okay, now where did you go for your basic training?
Basic training, okay, now we're going into the service. From Niagara, Fort Niagara, went to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. And that's where we had our basic training for about 3.5 months,
Mhm.
where we learned to operate what were mock ships. They had ships that were built on land in the mountains, so that we learned how to operate winches and cables and everything that loaded and unloaded ships.
Oh, okay.
So that was our basic training. And we were kind of stevedores, if you will. And we were there about 3.5 months, and then after that we moved out to California.
Whereabouts in California?
In the port of Wilmington, the city of Wilmington, which is the port for the city of Los Angeles.
Okay.
And that was right near Los Angeles, so. And that was for our further training, and we went on real ships at that point, and we were unloading, loading and unloading various kinds of ships, and there were, what do you call those? Cargo ships.
Mhm.
And we actually were working under the direction of the Longshoremen's Union. And the Longshoremen's Union said that we should get paid for what we're doing, the same rate that the longshoremen were getting. But the Army didn't go for that, so we had to observe. And we actually kind of, well, they let us operate some of the equipment, and but that was part of our training. So we were there at Wilmington, and then it was about another 3 months or so.
Okay.
That was in the port of Wilmington. We were actually living in the city of Wilmington under tents. I mean, there was tents in Southern California.
Okay.
Then after that, we got shipped over to a place called Camp Anza, which is not on the map anywhere. It's in the Anza Mountains there, and then we...
Now, that was in California?
California, right.
Okay.
It was like 40 miles out of Los Angeles over into the desert. And then we got shipped over to Camp Stoneman by, I forget exactly whether it was a train or buses.
Was that in California also?
California.
Okay. While you were in California, especially around the Los Angeles area, were you ever entertained at all by USO shows or?
Very much. That was one of our major things, because whenever I could, we were able to hitchhike to Hollywood, California, and saw the Hollywood Canteen, met Humphrey Bogart, Olivia de Havilland, several other people.
Oh, really?
And had her autographs at one point, but I don't know what happened to them. They were somewhere in the house maybe, and maybe not. But I had a good friend of mine that I got to learn, he got to be a good friend of mine, I got him mentioned here, Seth Hillsberg from Syracuse. He and I were when we were 18, and we were more interested in going to the Hollywood Canteen and going to bars or taverns or whatever. And actually, we could not get served because in California, the law was you couldn't get served until you were 21.
Oh,
You could be in the Army at 18, but you could not be served in a bar. And that ran into that a couple times when I went to some of the USO dances and whatnot. So anyway, that was Wilmington, California, and then we went north to Camp Stoneman, which was a camp on the near San Francisco, and that's where we went into some training, mostly marching around in the desert, and then we got equipped to go overseas. Well, we went to the rifle range and everything, and we got issued new rifles, and we got a new carbine that was a small 30 caliber 15 shot thing. I was glad to get that instead of the old. We had some Enfields and M1s that were 1903 vintage. That was in basic training, and when we got the carbines, I was happy because it was much lighter, and I was never a good shot, so I was glad to have 15 shots rather than the 5 that were in the old rifle. Okay, so we went to Camp Stone, and then we went to under the Golden Gate Bridge. I remember that, and we went on a ship that was a really cruiser type ship. I think it's kind of mentioned in here in the book, but it was I think it was renamed the West Point. But it was a very fast civilian type ship that went without escort to Australia. So we were faster than most of the Japanese that were in the part of the Pacific where we were going.
Yeah,
So
how long did that trip take you?
I can't remember exactly, about 2-3 weeks. I think that was we were able to eat like twice a day, and the ship was loaded with troops of all sorts. And I think we got 2 meals a day. That was what was a sort of a mid-morning type of breakfast, and then later on we got a bigger supper.
Did you get sick at all?
Did I get?
Did you get seasick?
No, I didn't get seasick. I was fortunate. Some of the other people did, but I didn't. And a lot of people, I mean, there were different things that people entertained themselves with. It was not a very entertaining trip, but we used to see sharks and stuff in the water nearby. But there were a lot of crab games and that sort of thing that went on the trip. And then we went into the Sydney Harbor, and we saw that big, I forgot the name of the bridge, but it was going into Sydney Harbor. We went onto into Sydney, and but it went into a let's see, I think this guy's sizing this written down.
Now, do you remember the date, the approximate date?
Not exactly.
Okay.
This guy's got
Probably late 1943?
Yes, I was in 1943.
Okay. What was Sydney like?
Okay, Sydney was interesting. We were able to we took some passes into Sydney. Okay, I'll tell you, September 25th, we left the United States aboard the USS West Point from San Francisco, California, and we landed in Sydney, Australia on October 10th, 1943.
Okay.
He's got that written in his book. So.
Okay.
And we went to a place called Warwick Farms, which was a place just outside of Sydney. And then, so we were there a couple of weeks in Sydney.
Now, did you get to go into town?
Yes, we did. And it was interesting because the restaurants were very great. I mean, and one of the big things that you go in a restaurant, you ordered steak and eggs, which was the Australian type of thing, for whatever, breakfast, lunch, supper, you could have steak and eggs. So I remember that.
How did the civilian populace treat you?
I think the ladies liked all the Americans that came, and I think the men didn't, but we did get to know a lot of the people later on, because we were on a ship that went up into, we went up we went from Sydney to Brisbane, Australia, which was a little further north, up the coast. We went by a train. I had my 19th birthday on that train. I know some of the guys bought me some cupcakes or whatever it was for my birthday. It's saying happy birthday. So anyway, that was what I remember. And we went to Brisbane, and from there we went to the USS John Jacob Astor, and we went from there and we arrived in Milne Bay, New Guinea. And he's got this written down in here. It's Camp Ahinoma, it's called. And then we left one camp and went to another place, and we went on the USS Dodge, and we went to Oro Bay, New Guinea. We got shipwrecked on a Collingswood Reef, and we were taken off the ship that we were on, which was a Liberty ship, and we were transferred to a destroyer called the USS Smith. And I remember that because we were up on deck on that destroyer. So they didn't put us underneath, and we could only take our backpack. We didn't even take our rifles, I don't believe. So we left all the equipment on the ship that was later caught up with us. We went to this destroyer, and we were in a place called Cape Sudeste in New Guinea, and that's where we were.
That's where you waited for your equipment to catch up with you?
It caught up with us there, and then we went on an LST. There's a landing ship tank. It was one of these things that I had the doors opened up in front, and that's where we went to New Britain. And one of the things that happened were we were attached to the 1st Marine Division that had been in Australia, and then they had been in, what's the other island? Not Australia, but New Zealand.
New Zealand.
And we went in with the 1st Marine Division. They had been on Guadalcanal before that, the 1st Marine Division. So we were attached to them. We were one of the few Army outfits that went in with the Marines on that New Britain invasion.
Now how big was your outfit?
Our outfit was, by that time, they split us up into companies. So we were the 244th Port Company. And actually, we all were together yet in this Cape Gloucester, New Britain invasion. And we were, there weren't any docks in the area that we were landing, so everything was, the ships that we unloaded were out in the as they called it, the stream. So the landing craft came alongside, and we unloaded whatever we were unloading into those ships. And then the Marines also had a thing called the landing, it was like a small tank that went into the water. And I ran into a guy I knew from high school. He had been a football player, and he joined the Marines. He was in high school about 2 years before me, and I knew him, and he was driving one of these things. So he held out to him. It was Kensington High School, so I knew him. His name was Elmer Butch Mayer. He had been a football player, so I knew him. And we had beers together several times afterwards.
Now, when you were in New Britain, what kind of living facilities did you have?
Tents.
Tents?
We lived in tents for almost the rest of the time we were overseas.
Okay. Did you have to pull security, or did the Marines do that?
No, it sort of was a mixed thing. When we went onto the ships, We were, we carried our rifles with us, because our rifles caught up with us, but we concentrated on unloading the ships. And the Marines had gone further inland, and after they had invaded and took over an area, and the major thing that they were doing was to build a airfield. And that was like when you had these, it was like an erector set. You had these, I forgot what they call them.
I believe they call them like perforated steel plating.
Exactly.
That
They
line
click
together.
together and you unload it. That was one of the major things we were unloading at that time, so that the Marines were able, the engineers, I think there might have been some engineers, but I think the Marines were putting some of that together for the Air Force.
Now, were you using like a lift truck for that, or was it all by hand?
Actually, when we unloaded the big, they came in stacks, and we put them into these landing craft. And then I'm sure they had a couple of, it wasn't muscle, it was mostly cranes. They had some cranes that landed first, and they were able to unload those into trucks that took them to the airfield.
Okay. Now let me ask, how did you guys, being in the Army, get along with the Marines?
It was, I'll put it okay. And part of it were, when I saw this Butch Mayer, I'll call him that, that's what his name was, and he invited me over to his camp area, which was like almost like a quarter of a mile away from ours. And he invited me over to have a beer with him, because the Marines had beer and we didn't. And that was one of the things. And then I remember one of the things that the Marine said, who's the dog face? Okay, this is the Army guy, okay. He's always a friend of mine. He says, okay, have another beer. So the Marines, and we got along very well with the Marines, very honestly. And when they came from the front, when they were being relieved, and when they had captured a sort of they secured an area near a river in New Britain that, and they were coming back, and they were really beat up pretty well. I mean, it rained almost all the time in New Britain. And our clothes were rotten, our shoes were rotten, and the Marines were in worse shape than we were. So what we did, we gave the Marines our clothes as they were driving or walking by. They didn't drive by, they weren't on any trucks or anything. So we gave them canteens of water and whatever we had to share with them. So the Marines and we got along quite well, I would say. I mean, there was sort of a difference sometimes.
Sure.
But I mean, it was like even other outfits. I mean, but Butch and I recalled that, and I'll do this as an aside. I didn't see him later on because his outfit moved on to the, I forgot what invasion he went in on, but it was the Marianas or Enowetak or whatever it was, where the 1st Marine Division went up further. And I didn't see Elmer again until I saw him at a wake of one of his relatives who was a member of the church that I was attending. And I walked up to him and I said, Elmer, I haven't seen you since we were in New Britain together. So we did see each other again.
Now, how many years was that?
Oh God, that was several years later. I can't remember exactly. But it was after we got discharged. I was discharged from the Army in 1945. And it might have been about, I got married in 53, so it was like around 53 or thereabouts. So that's when I got married, right?
Yes.
My wife died last year. So,
sorry.
So it was, so we had gone to this church that one of the members was a good friend of my wife, and then she thought that I was some sort of a hero because I was with her cousin Elmer on New Britain. She was part of the Marines or whatever. But anyway, that was New Britain. And actually his outfit had a bomb dropped right on his outfit. Japanese Zeros came over, and they went over, and I went over to see his camp. He was okay, but about 8 or 10 guys got killed in one of the tents that was near him. But I remember seeing Elmer then.
Now, I see you have written down here something about a kamikaze
Oh,
attack.
that was later. That was when, after New Britain, because one of the things that we did was, okay, I got to think of where we were. There was Cape Gloucester, and then we went back to Finchhaven on New Guinea, and then the guy that wrote the book, the Cain, he they split our outfit into pieces. He went to Bayak, and I didn't. We went to Atapi in New Guinea, which was up the coast. And Atapi was the place where we were, they dropped a Japanese Zero came in and dropped a torpedo into a ship that we were unloading. And the people that were in, the troops that were unloading in number 5 hold of this Liberty ship were killed. I was a number 4 hold, and when that torpedo hit, I woke up, and very honestly, I was fortunate enough to be able to get off that ship, and so did most of the rest of our outfit.
Were you wounded at all?
No, I wasn't wounded, and I was fortunate I wasn't wounded. The shrapnel flew around, but I was okay. And we got off we came down on the side of the ship. You have these cargo nets that catch the cargo if it falls down. And we were able to climb by, and a Navy LCM, I think it was, came by and picked us up and landed ashore. So we were able to get to the shore. And our little group, we sort of came off almost together. And one of my good friends that I mentioned here, this Howard Rogers from Florida, was in the front part of the ship. And he actually climbed down a rope, landed in the water, and swam to the shore. He wasn't sure whether he was going into Japanese territory or not. And we talked about that later when Howard calls me, and we'll talk about remember when kind of stuff.
Now, how far was the ship from shore?
Not too far. It was but it couldn't land any closer because the cargo was down, and the ship kind of goes up when the cargo goes off. But our LCM landed ashore, and one of the things that I remember was when we got on shore, there were an Australian truck outfit came to the shore, and they yelled out in their own inimitable accent, "This way, Yanks." So we knew they were Australians, because we were in Australia, and we went up to New Guinea, and part of the people that were on the ship were Australian troops. So we went on their trucks, and they took us to an evacuation hospital. And when we got there, they said, "We'll give you a cot, and we'll give you a blanket." They said, "But if any wounded come from the front, we'll have to chase you guys out." Okay. So we stayed there like a couple of days, and then we had a makeshift kind of area with actually it wasn't even tarps, it was like big, I think there were tarps of some sort that we chopped down trees, and we made like tent area. And we sort of made do at that time. We also dug foxholes to stay in. And so that was in Atapi, New Guinea. But the worst thing that I remember happening, I mean, we got shot at and we got torpedoed there in Atapi, in New Guinea. And so we got strafed at later when we got to the Philippines, but that's another part.
Let me ask you this. Did you have a problem with, you said it rained constantly, you were in a tropical climate. Any problems with disease like malaria or dengue fever? Or?
Got them both. I had both malaria and dengue fever later. And we all had it, but we used to get these Ativan tablets that used to be a medication that would subside the the effects of malaria, particularly. And it turns your skin yellow, kind of. I don't know whether you ever heard
Yes.
about that.
Yep.
But I know that being kind of a sallow complected guy, I guess you could see that I had the Atabrine effects on me. And but I didn't really get a serious malaria attack until near the end of the war, and I also had dengue fever. And that was called breakbone fever, if you will. A friend of mine, guy that goes to our church, is a doctor, that he was interested in dengue fever, and he wrote a whole thing and gave it to me. He said, dengue fever, by the certain kind of mosquito. I know about the malaria. There's an Anopheles mosquito, and we kind of used to keep our when we settled down someplace, we had these nets, mosquito nets all over the place. And I used to kind of keep myself covered and all that. And that's another thing you learn, I think, after a while you were in the tropics. We kept our shirts on, we kept our hats on, so we didn't have sunstroke, and we didn't get sunburned, and we didn't get mosquito bites.
What about snakes, scorpions, or even those land crabs? Any?
Oh, land crabs were all over the place, but that sort of didn't bother us. I mean, we knew they were there, and we didn't. It didn't happen. Scorpions I never saw there. I think I saw them in that was later on in civilian life, but that was in Ecuador. Yeah, that was. My wife and I went on a vacation because my son-in-law at that time was working in Ecuador as a flour miller.
Oh.
But that's another adventure. That was civilian life.
Okay.
But let's see, where were we now? We were still in Itapi. Okay. And when we went Itapi, we went to the other end of New Guinea, to a place called Sansapor, and that's where our outfit got put together again. And Sai Khan joined us again from his platoon went to Biak, B-I-A-K Island, and that's where he wrote a lot of his adventures there, which were a little different than mine, okay? So, and I wrote to Sai. He wanted me to write the whole story, which I didn't do until now, more or less. So it was, but this Howard Rogers was the one that was on when we got on the ship that went to the Philippines. That's where, in the southern part of the Philippines, where the Kamikazes came out and hit a cargo ship and a troop ship that was alongside the one we were on. And this friend of mine that calls me from Florida every once in a while was in a gun tub in the front of the ship. I was in a gun tub in the back of the ship. And the Navy taught us how to load the 40 millimeter anti-aircraft guns and the 20 millimeter guns. In case they got shot, we would replace them in the gun tubs. So we were on the gun tubs going on our way to the Philippines. So we were able to see things with these huge binoculars that they had up there for us. And they had these big helmets up there. So we would take turns going up there, and they would show us how to do that. But we did see the Kamikaze hit the ship next to us. And that they were the suicide bombers, actually. They sacrificed themselves and hit the ships.
Were you able to shoot at it at all? Or?
Luckily, I didn't have to. And I think maybe some of the Navy, they shot at the Kamikazes that were coming down, and that one hit the ship next to us. And that ship didn't sink, it kept going. But we did see bodies come off the ship that were sort of dumped into the water, actually. So that was one of our experiences that on our way to the Philippines. Then when we landed in the Philippines, we came off the ship. Our LST didn't land at the shore. And the LCM that took us off the ship that we were on hit a sandbar. So we could not wade ashore. So I came off into the Philippines. I know I held my rifle over my head, and so did a couple of the people that were with me. They were like, we were in the same platoon in the same section. And what I remember was Felix Cano, who was from Texas. And he spoke Spanish most of the time, and most of his language was swear words in Spanish, which I learned. I sort of forgot them now. But he taught me a lot of things. And he fell down. He had a big rifle, and he fell down backwards. He had a backpack on his back, and he was underwater. And I lifted him up, so my rifle went underwater. And Felix and I went ashore, and we were trying to clean our rifles because there were snipers, Japanese snipers ashore. And so we sort of, under a little, along the coast, you always knew that there was like a little, where the beach ended and the shore began.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of ducked down under there. But luckily, a engineer outfit with small bulldozers were on shore, and they went into that pillbox where the Japanese sniper was and buried him. So they just kind of plowed him under, and that was it. So that was our experience in landing in the Philippines. That was Luzon.
Now, did you ever have any really close encounters with the Japanese?
No, personally I did not.
Okay.
No, that was, I think we were fortunate in that way. And that way I felt, you know, I think the worst thing that I remember was getting torpedoed in Atabi in New Guinea.
Mm-hmm.
But we were strafed at a couple times in the Philippines because the Japanese were on one mountain and they were shelling some of the beach, but it wasn't like, it didn't hit near me, so I was okay. Mm-hmm. I know when they were shelling us, we kind of left the area that we were in because it was near, we were actually stationed in a rice paddy that was supposed to be dry, but it rained, so we were in a rice paddy which was full of water. So we got out of there, we walked along the tracks and we went to a near city, I forgot what the name of the city was, and went to church, and it was interesting that some of the people that were in our outfit, and a lot of the people that were in our outfits were Southern Baptists, okay. We talked a lot about, you know, our various religions and stuff like that. And they said, is it okay to go to a church? I said, sure. I said, the blessing's on you, I told them. And they said, come on in. And a couple of my good friends, Seth Hillsberg was a Jewish guy from Syracuse, who was my best friend, actually. He was the guy that went with me to these Hollywood canteen things. Mm-hmm. And we had a lot of conversations about all kinds of stuff. And Seth was the guy that would wake me up to go to Mass on a Sunday morning, because he used to get up earlier than I did. He says, Ted, Sunday you got to go to church. So that's what he told me. But Seth and I kind of had a lot of these conversations about all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. So.
Now, did you stay in touch with him after the war?
Not as much as I really should have, but I think he came to Buffalo one time, and I met him in a bowling alley. And we talked to each other and said we got to get together, but we didn't. And from what I know now, he has passed away. Oh. So he was from Syracuse, real smart guy. He went to Syracuse University, and I went to the University of Buffalo, so we kind of talked a little bit about what we were doing at that point. So that was, I think, where did we go? Okay, then when we were in the Philippines, we continued to load and unload ships, and I had a different job at that point. It was called a supercargo, and I was in charge of a dock which unloaded about 4 or 5 ships at a time. And I used to be in touch with the quartermaster as to what we were unloading at that time. And I think I want to add something here that I think was different, because our outfit was a port company that was, as I said, half north and half south, the Yankees and the Rebels. But another port company that was right near us was World War II, the Army was segregated. Mm-hmm. We had black troops and white troops, and there was a black port company that was right near us. And I was one of the guys on the dock that we had, some of the unloading went by the other port company, the black troops, and our port company. And actually, between the two companies, we built, I wasn't involved in it, but one of the things that you learn when you're a port company, you acquire certain things. In other words, you may acquire them by taking whatever you need. Okay, I'll put it that way. And
Liberating.
they did too. So what we did, they and we built a basketball court. And I know Seth Hillsberg was one of the better basketball players in our whole unit. And then there were a couple of people from Alabama. I remember James O. Glasgow, I remember him. He was from Alabama, red-headed guy, a real rebel. And we formed teams that were black and white, north and south, that challenged some of the bigger outfits that were divisions and battalions, and our two port companies beat them because we had mixed troops. And we had basketball teams. I think that's sort of an unusual thing, but I thought I'd mention that. And
so overall, everyone got along.
I think we did a good job on all that. And I think one of the things we always kidded about it and all that kind of stuff. And I know some of the guys that were from, one guy was from Oklahoma. He was a real good basketball player. And he was a guy that was sort of a segregationist, but he was a good basketball player. And he played with the troops. And that was sort of an interesting thing, I think.
When you were at Kensington High School, was that integrated?
No.
No. That was all white school, wasn't it?
Just about, and
Just
I
about.
remember one person that was a senior that I met later, but she was the only black person in the school. There were a couple of American Indians, but there were just one black person. And I met her again later because one of the persons that was a faculty member of the University of Buffalo was a black person who was on the faculty, and he married this lady that was from Kensington High School. And she says, oh yes, I remember Kensington High School, and it wasn't the most pleasant experience. I remember her telling me that.
Yeah.
Doris, her name was, but that was it. But that was a lot of things that you sort of learned through the service. And I think it sort of, later on, I think when I finished at the School of Social Work, I think I learned a lot from the Army experience and the integration experience and all that kind of stuff. Then our outfit went into Japan, so that was when we were in the northern Philippines. It was in Luzon, and
Well, obviously the war had ended at that point.
the atomic bombs were dropped. Good old President Harry Truman.
What was that like when you heard about the bombs being dropped?
I thought it was great, and I think that later on I realized a lot of people have talked about it, that we shouldn't have done it, but I have felt differently about it because I thought that ended the war, and really did. And then we were one of the first troops that were, there were some other troops that were in Japan, but we were in the early part, but about a month or maybe a month and a half after the bombs were dropped, we went into Yokohama. And that was the port for Tokyo. And that Yokohama was a city that was almost completely burned down. And actually, we started to live in tents again, and because that's what we were in. But we had these squad tents that were bigger than the pyramidal tents, the small 6-person tents. There were maybe about 20 people. But in Yokohama, in the basements and in the different places that might have been still, a lot of Japanese people were living in those basements, and mostly women with children. And they would come and try to beg food from what we would dispose of, which was garbage cans. You know, you get food and then you throw some of it in the garbage can. And that, I remember this, okay? I remember saying this, okay guys, let's go for seconds, whether you're gonna eat them or not. Let's go and get some of these seconds and give the food to these ladies that come by. I think that was my first experience as a social worker, I suppose. But anyway, and a lot of my fellow troops did the same thing. They got their seconds, and we went and fed the Japanese. And very honestly, there was another thing that I had an experience which was different. And I had gone from Yokohama to Tokyo, and that's where I had this picture taken of me and this near the Emperor's Moat. And this was me in front of the Emperor's Moat, and I think I got two of those, right? No, okay.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I got that one.
Okay, can you just hold that up for a second?
Okay.
Okay, got it.
Okay. And this one is another one that was taken, and I forget where that was taken, whether it was in New Britain or New Guinea. I think it might have been Philippines, I'm not sure. I have to check it out somehow.
Okay.
But that was my platoon. And I can name all the guys on there, but yeah, Felix is on, and okay, I can name all the people that are on there.
Okay.
Oh, that's me. That was from basic training. I think it was in near Indian Tomcat, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
17, right?
I was
17 years old, 18 there?
18 there,
Okay. Now, how much time did you spend in Japan?
yeah. About a month and a half. But I had this experience of, I was starting to tell you this about this Yokohama to Tokyo. One time, the Japanese trains were, and I think they still got the reputation of being very accurate with their time and all that. And we went from, let's see, I was in Tokyo, and I was going back towards Yokohama where our camp was. But we passed it, and we went to the next city, which was called, gee, I forgot, Akioma, I think, something like that. It was a small town which was known as the Hollywood of Japan. And we got off the train, and there was one of our outfit, he was on the train with me. So we got off, and we went to there was an American MP at that train station. And they said, we wanted to take a look at this town. And what we saw on the train was a huge statue. I got some pictures at home and I couldn't find them. Of the goddess of mercy, the Japanese goddess. And I took a picture of that. And I said, maybe we could take a look at that goddess. And the MP said, well, okay, you could take a look at that. So when we got off the train station, a girl, young lady, maybe about 12, 13 years old, 12, 14 years old, said, would you like to come to our house? She spoke in English, a Japanese girl. So there's one man from our company, his name was Peacock, forgot his first name. He and I went and said, okay, we'll go. And they invited us to her home in English. And she said, would you wait here? And it's the thing that she had to go in the house and ask her father whether she could invite these troops into the house. So we stood outside for a little bit. Then the father came out, and he had been a banker in Great Britain. So he spoke English, the kids spoke English, and then they invited us to their house. So Peacock and I took our shoes off, which you usually do when you go into a Japanese house. And we visited there several times afterwards. So I got to know that Japanese family. They invited us to dinner. We had various kinds of dinners, lunches, whatever, in their, you sat on the floor and you ate their food. And I thought that was a great experience. I think a lot of people didn't have that. But they also took us to a Buddhist temple. So they took us, and I have a little booklet, like a pad, where I got my pad stamped at the Buddhist temple. And I sort of got addresses and some of my notes about what my experiences were. So anyway, that was and then we were glad when we left Japan, that we left, and we got shipped over to Portland, Oregon. But we were stationed in a place called Vancouver Barracks in Washington, the state of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So we did get to the city of Portland a couple of times on passes, and they were all glad to see us. And then we took the train, and Buffalo, where we were heading for home by that time, took us to Camp Atterbury, Indiana, and that's where I got discharged.
Okay. And when was that?
That was in, I got that written down here someplace.
November 28th?
Yes, 1945.
Okay. And then you headed for Buffalo.
Headed for Buffalo and came to the central terminal. I called home, called my mother and my stepfather, and I think my sister. No, my sister was someplace else at that time. But anyway, we came to Buffalo, and I know my mother started crying because I still had some of the Atterbury skin color on me.
Uh-huh.
And I was kind of yellow. I said, "Ma, I'm okay." So we went to the central terminal, and that's where we came home.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my stepfather had this 1933 Buick, which he had through the war, and it had an A stamp that you used to have where gasoline was rationed. You know?
Uh-huh.
And he worked at the Curtis war plant, and it became Westinghouse later, but it was on near the airport.
Uh-huh.
So he worked there, and that's where I came home.
Okay.
And what I didn't know, but he had a terminal illness at that time,
Ah.
and he died later on, I think in 1946.
Okay. Now, did you make use of the GI Bill?
Absolutely. I thought that was one of the best things that ever happened. And I think I say there something, thank God for the GI Bill.
Mm-hmm.
And I got my bachelor's at UB, and I majored in biology. And then I think I was thinking at that time I might go to medical school or something like that. But my grades weren't that high, okay?
Uh-huh.
But I think when I switched over to major in sociology and psychology and some of the other courses, and I raised my average and all that stuff. But by that time I learned about the School of Social Work, and I think that would be interesting. So I did graduate from the School of Social Work at the University of Buffalo, and I got my master's there. I passed a, what do you call that? I was able to get a scholarship for the second half because the social services, Masters in Social Work is a 2-year program.
Mm-hmm.
And I had enough GI time to finish the first year, but I got that scholarship to finish the second year.
Oh.
So I was able to finish that. I got that from New York State.
Okay.
So I did work for New York State a couple of different times.
All right. And did you join any veterans
Yes,
organizations?
I do belong now to the VFW, the post in the 416, and that's the post in near our home. Where is that?
Williamsville.
In Williamsville. Yeah, I should have brought my cap.
Okay. How do you think your time in the service changed or affected your life?
I think it did a lot because I think I learned a lot. And I think some of the things I mentioned earlier about the different people that were in the Army outfit, that taught me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think going into the Philippines and then Japan taught me more. And I think part of it was the North and the South, and that was the different people that were like the Southern Baptists and all of them, and we had some differences, but we had a lot of things in common.
Mm-hmm.
And we laughed about it a lot, and we kind of talked about it. And as I said, there's, like Howard Rogers is still a good friend that will call me once in a while. Some of the others, I had written letters to them and all that, but very honestly, I'm one of the few guys that, okay.
Okay, all right. We're back.
No, that taught me a lot, I think, and then I think so that kind of set me up for what I eventually wanted to do, and it did. I worked in the social services department, first in the Erie County department, and then after I got my master's, I went on to the School of Social Work, and I worked for a New York State Department of Social Services and also for the New York State Department of Mental Health. So I was able to do a sideways switch because I had different kinds of experiences. And passed the exams, which I did. I was able to pass exams to get my civil service. Then I retired from the state, okay?
Okay. And during that time, you got married and raised a family?
Yes, I got married in, we're
1953.
1953, okay. And I got married in November 24th, 1953.
Okay. And how many children do you have?
3 children. I have Judy, my youngest daughter. I have a son who's in the middle, and he lives in Williamsville also. Well, he lives in Williamsville. We live in Snyder, or what is called Snyder, in Amherst, actually. And my older daughter lives in city of Tonawanda. And she now works for the Erie County Department of Social Services. So she says something must have been in my genes or whatever it is.
I heard a little story. Can you tell us the story of meeting Orson Welles?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, Seth Hillsberg and I went to the Hollywood Canteen frequently. And then Orson Welles had the theater, whatever it was called, forgot the name of the theater. The Orson Welles Theater, I think. But we were there in the front row one time, and Seth Hillsberg and I were in the front row, and he says, I need 2 GIs to come up on the stage. And he says, how about you 2? So Seth and I looked at each other, we went up on the stage, and he had us hold a rope on each end. So Seth and I held a rope, and he collected different things from the audience. Rings, wallets, necklaces, and we held the rope, and he covered it with something. And when they took the cover off, we were still holding the 2 ends of the thing. So all of the different things that he collected were on that rope. How he did it, I have no idea. But Seth and I said, we were on the stage with Orson Welles. And that was true. So we were on the stage with Orson Welles. And he was a good actor. I mean, I always enjoyed him. I mean, in some of his movies. And what was that thing that he did?
Citizen Cain?
Citizen Cain was one of the ones that I remembered. When he got...
Coach, to ask about your medals that you received.
Oh, the medals, okay.
And your best letter writer.
Most of my letters were from my sister Virginia.
Oh.
Okay. And she became an actress in California. And you might know the program which was called, what was it called? I Lived 3 Lives. She was with Richard Carlson in that series called I Lived 3 Lives, where he was a communist for the FBI, and she was his wife.
Oh.
And she was on TV for about 3 or 4 years.
What was her acting name?
Virginia Myers Steffen. And that was her married name. And she married a guy named, what was it, Bud? What was his first name? Let's see, Robert Steffen.
Okay.
She's buried in the St. Stanislaus Church Cemetery, and she's got a monument that says "All the world's a stage" and whatever quotation. But that's where she died in New York City, and she came back to Buffalo. I mean, her body did.
Mhm.
I see that you've received the Asiatic Pacific Theater Ribbon
Yes,
with 4 bronze stars,
right.
the Philippine Liberation Ribbon with 2 bronze stars,
One bronze.
or 1 bronze star, the Good Conduct Medal,
Yep.
and the World War II Victory Medal.
Right. Those were my medals, and that was on my discharge paper, which
Okay.
I brought, I think.
Okay.
So anyway, those were the medals that I got. And the 4 battle stars they weren't the bronze star, because sometimes you get...
Right, right.
But they were battle stars that were in the 4 battles that we were in, which was, I think I got that written down.
Okay. All right. We're down to about 30 seconds, so we'll end it here. Thank you so much for your interview.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I talk a lot sometimes.
Very interesting experience.
It was a good interview. Thank you.
You're welcome.